build resilience at the community level. We call on donor countries to significantly increase their contributions to the fund for responding to loss and damage, to ensure it adequately addresses the severe losses and damage incurred by vulnerable countries annually. Our small states may be the most vulnerable, but we are also the boldest. We will continue to turn promises into progress, pledges into impact, vulnerability into leadership. Together, let us secure a legacy where resilience is not an aspiration, but a defining reality for all. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Amit Proti, Director General of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellencies, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, made up of 52 countries and 10 organizations, commends the Brazilian presidency's efforts to frame this as a COP of implementation and to include a focus on infrastructure. 1.2 billion people and 14% of global growth are at risk every year from climate-induced disasters. These disasters destroy lives, disrupt services, deplete scarce resources. Their impacts are felt by communities for decades. It is important also that we acknowledge that these risks are not distributed fairly. Small island developing states, for example, are already dealing with unsustainable losses. Some estimates of the economic losses suffered by Jamaica from Hurricane Melissa exceed $10 billion already. This is a significant portion of the country's GDP. My message to you today is that implementing disaster-resilient infrastructure is one of the best decisions we can make. It protects lives, safeguards economies, unlocks growth, and supports rapid recovery. It is also a smart investment choice. Every dollar invested in resilient infrastructure will return a dividend of $7 to $12 and at a macroeconomic level can cut long-term GDP losses by half. Two things have stood out to me in these discussions here in Belem. Firstly, the growing confidence in how we can use data and technology, including artificial intelligence and Earth observation. The Brazilian military firefighting corps are already using satellite data and sensors to spot wildfires, reducing response time and limiting damage. Secondly, the acceptance that we must put nature-based solutions at the heart of adaptation. Excellencies, despite the risks we face and the losses we are suffering, we are at a moment of opportunity. More than half of the infrastructure we will need by 2050 is yet to be built. If we act now, we can lock in resilience and reduce risks for current and future generations. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ezequiel Nibigira, President of the Economic Community of Central African States. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de la COP30, Mesdames, Messieurs, distingués délégués, c'est un honneur pour moi de m'adresser à cette auguste assemblée au nom de la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique centrale à un moment décisif pour l'avenir de notre planète. L'Afrique centrale abrite le bassin du Congo, deuxième massif forestier tropical après l'Amazonie, qui nous reçoit à l'occasion de la présente COP. Ce patrimoine, essentiel à la régulation du climat mondial et à la survie de millions de nos concitoyens, est aujourd'hui menacé par la déforestation, l'exploitation non durable des ressources et les effets croissants du changement climatique. Pourtant, il ne reçoit pas encore l'attention qu'il mérite dans les mécanismes financiers et technologiques existants. Nos populations subissent déjà les conséquences: baisse des rendements agricoles, insécurité alimentaire, déplacements forcés et catastrophes naturelles plus fréquentes. Ces impacts compromettent les efforts de développement de nos États et réduisent la croissance du PIB par habitant. Face à cela, la CEAC réaffirme son engagement à mettre en œuvre des politiques climatiques régionales ambitieuses, à renforcer la résilience des économies de la région et à promouvoir une transition juste et équitable. Nous ne réussirons pas cela seuls. La CEAC appelle la communauté internationale à honorer les enjeux de la COP30, qu'il s'agisse de la justice climatique ou du financement climatique en faveur des pays pauvres, et à valoriser les services écosystémiques que les forêts de la région Afrique centrale rendent au monde entier. Ensemble, faisons du climat un vecteur de solidarité internationale et d'espoir. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ashish Khanna, Director General of the International Solar Alliance. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me start by thanking the Federated Republic of Brazil for their leadership of COP30 and for their valued membership of ISA. I commend the Presidency's effort in shaping this COP into a COP of implementation. The International Solar Alliance was envisioned at COP21 in Paris with a clear purpose: to make solar energy a driver of global climate action and sustainable development. On the 20th anniversary of its announcement, ISA is moving fast to translate its ambition to action. With the current momentum, the global solar power generating capacity is on track to double by 2030. To its member countries, ISA reiterates its commitment to ensuring that this growth is dispersed equitably through decisive, solutions-oriented initiatives. ISA will deliver this through its implementation-focused platforms, such as 1. SIDS platform for aggregating demand and harmonizing procurement across small island developing states. 2. Global Solar Facility, which is catalyzing blended finance products for unlocking investor confidence in countries and regions with high perceived risk. 3. One Sun, One World, One Grid vision, announced at COP26 Glasgow, for enabling trade of renewable energy across borders and oceans. 4th, championing digital transformation of utilities, empowering them to better integrate variable renewable energy and storage solutions into their grids by deploying AI-powered tools. Together, these efforts demonstrate ISA's resolve to help shape a global energy system that is cleaner, more resilient, and more equitable across the world, from the smallest island to the largest continent. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Shamala K. Sadhguru, Executive Director of the International Tropical Timber Organization. Madam, you have the floor.
Excellencies, honorable ministers, and distinguished delegates. The International Tropical Timber Organization congratulates the host government of COP30, Brazil, and also for placing the future viability of tropical forests at the core. These precious ecosystems are crucial to both climate mitigation and adaptation and the conservation of global biodiversity. Equally important for long-term conservation are economic development and social benefits for forest owners, local communities, and indigenous people who live and depend on tropical forests, currently estimated at 1.6 billion people. Being the foundation of climate-smart circular bioeconomies, sustainable tropical forest management conserves natural resources, provides a wide range of goods and services, enriches livelihoods, reduces poverty, stores and sequesters carbon, and enhances resilience to climate change challenges. The full potential of tropical forests on all fronts needs to be empowered by paradigm shifts and immediate change to warn narratives. Most importantly, funding should flow to those who sustainably manage them. Sustainable harvesting is not deforestation. Wood is one of the most environmentally friendly and naturally renewable materials versus others with more significant carbon footprints. Integrated forest value chains bolster transformational climate impacts and materializes inclusive sustainable development. Sustainably managed tropical forests its products and services are a clear nature-based solution for a climate-resilient future. Deliberations at this COP must go beyond just the recognition of tropical forests' crucial contributions. The formulation of innovative partnerships and sustainable financial mechanisms are critical to reach people where it matters most, on the ground. The ITTO urges acceleration of investments, financing, and incentives to enable sustainable tropical forests to continue to underpin the most effective contributions to global climate and developmental goals. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Alexandre Pupo Quintino, Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Ibero-America. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's a pleasure for me, serving as Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Ibero-America, to be here in my home country. I want to extend my gratitude to the UNFCCC team and for President Lula for gathering us all here in the Amazon and promoting the greatest social participation in the history of COPs. I'm here to channel the voices of the young people marching in the streets of Belém, filling the stands in the green zone, and the very few who make into the negotiation rooms. Señorías, hay un claro paradoja. Las juventudes son quienes más sufren los impactos de la crisis climática y al mismo tiempo quienes más actúan en las soluciones de primera línea. Sin embargo, seguimos siendo subrepresentados y subfinanciados. Solo el 0,76% de la financiación climática global llega a las organizaciones lideradas por jóvenes. Por eso, las autoridades de juventud iberoamericana lanzaron un llamado unificado: destinar al menos el 5% de la financiación climática internacional a proyectos liderados por jóvenes. Excelências, isso não é apenas uma bandeira, é o mínimo necessário para escalar soluções que já existem nos nossos territórios e acelerar a agenda de ação da COP. Financiar as juventudes é a solução que apresentamos para alterar o ritmo insuficiente com que temos respondido à urgência que temos diante de nós. Nós, jovens, queremos mudar os paradigmas de desenvolvimento. Não podemos mais reproduzir modelos predatórios que ampliam as desigualdades e a distância entre o norte e o sul. Queremos construir esse outro planeta possível, pois ele é essencial para enxergarmos o nosso futuro e das futuras gerações. Excellencies, let us be clear. This is the COP of truth and implementation. Let us not be naive. We know there will be no implementation without mobilization and funding. There will be no future without strengthening youth. Join us in defending 5% for youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite representatives from civil society organizations to address the conference. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Andrew Wilson on behalf of business and industry NGOs. Sir, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me begin with a clear and unequivocal message from the global business community. We are and remain fully committed to ambitious climate action. In the decades since the Paris Agreement was concluded, companies across every sector have unleashed unprecedented waves of innovation, deploying clean technologies, reshaping supply chains, and mobilizing capital at a pace few previously thought possible. The private sector has not waited for permission to act. We have demonstrated both the will and the ability to deliver. But to reach the scale and speed that science, and indeed society, demand, we need this COP to come away with a political outcome that drives implementation, not just another restatement of aspiration. From a business perspective, the priorities are clear. We need an outcome that provides confidence that governments remain aligned behind the Paris goals and the aim of keeping 1.5 within reach. We need an outcome that accelerates action to build resilience to a changing climate And above all, we need an outcome that unlocks climate financing across emerging and developing economies. Without a credible pathway for mobilizing private capital at scale in these markets, we cannot meaningfully talk about the global energy transition. Simply put, the world cannot decarbonize on true tracks, and effective implementation can't happen without the underpinning finance. In our view, this COP has a unique opportunity to send a signal with real bite, one that shifts the pace of investment and empowers the real economy to move further, faster, and together. Global business stands ready, make no mistake. We urge ministers, we urge governments to seize this moment and forge an outcome that turns ambition into action and action into real-world impact, just as Paris intended. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Rachita Gupta on behalf of environmental NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Chair, parties, comrades. I voluntarily disclose I have no ties with any fossil fuel companies, big agriculture corporations, or any Zionist entities. I begin by sharing our unwavering and absolute solidarity with the indigenous peoples and their right to protest in all forms of expression. We come to this plenary from the streets of Belém, where more than 70,000 people marched last week and hundreds of thousands mobilized across the world. Their message was clear. People are doing the work the governments refuse to do. When we come to this room, we are being asked to celebrate the Paris Agreement, to applaud ourselves 9 years later. But we ask, celebrate what progress? The UNFCCC was created to cut emissions, yet global emissions continue to rise. Governments were mandated to submit their indices, yet so many did not, and those who did were riddled with false solutions, offsets, carbon markets, and corporate wish lists instead of real emission cuts. We are told Paris was a success, but countries cannot even meet their own minimal, inadequate promises. We are asked to cheer while the world burns. And when it comes to finance, the most basic element of justice, what do we see? Rich countries bicker over brackets, commas, should, could, would, but refuse to commit even a fraction of public finance needed in the global south. These are the same rich countries who caused this crisis, the criminals of carbon, the architects of climate injustice. And now that the world is demanding accountability, they pull every possible trick to dodge responsibility, sabotage climate finance, and block any progress on a real just transition. But let us be clear, a just transition cannot be powered by offsets, carbon markets, CCS fantasies, or land grabs. A just transition must center workers, farmers, indigenous peoples, women, peasants, fisherfolk, queer, frontline communities, not polluters. But what do we see instead? No money for adaptation, loss and damage, or just transition. Rich governments cannot find any money for survival of humanity, yet spend 5% of their GDP on defense, pour trillions into weapons, militarization, and war. Countries and corporations willingly fuel genocide from Palestine to across the world, but refuse to even count military emissions in their climate reporting. They have money for violence, but not for justice. And then we are told that this COP is an inclusive space, where frontline voices will be heard. But we witnessed the silencing of civil society, of frontline organizations, of indigenous people right here in the heart of Amazon. We see badges for 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists, 530 CCS lobbyists, and 300 industrial agricultural lobbyists. So there are badges for polluters, but no access for us. Let us not forget this process was born from the struggle of the streets in the streets of Rio, where people demanded global climate action in 1992. 33 years later, we are back in Brazil, but this institution has forgotten its origins. The UNFCCC exists because people built it, and today those people are being silenced. The COP cannot succeed while the voices of those least responsible and most affected are silenced. The people's movement outside have shown us a different path. real solutions exist. We'll continue to fight for that inside these halls, outside these gates, and across the world. Because if governments will not deliver justice, people's movements will. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Jyoti Fernandez on behalf of farmers and agricultural NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jyoti Fernandez from the UK, speaking on behalf of the farmers' constituency. Farmers are facing existential threats from floods, droughts, and extreme weather that threaten our ability to produce food and other ecosystem services we all depend on. Prioritizing adaptation is key to aligning high-level goals with on-the-ground realities, injecting new energy into climate efforts, and rebuilding trust in this process. A just rural transition that reflects the realities of rural economies and farming systems requires a global goal on adaptation that captures adaptation on farm, reflects diverse agro-ecosystems, and is supported by dedicated adaptation finance, available, accessible, and predictable at grassroots level, delivered primarily through grants, concessional funding, and non-debt creating instruments. Long-term investment in agricultural resilience by leveraging farmers' organizations as direct channels and trusted intermediaries. Protecting the rights of farmers, including peasants and rural communities, safeguarding the fundamental priority of food security. We are incredibly disappointed that agricultural negotiations continue to fail to deliver for farmers. But despite this, because of this, we double down on our commitment to working with the Presidency and parties to ensure that farmers' diverse experiences and vital contributions are fully reflected in the process and its outcomes. The recognition of farmers' role and engagement is essential to realizing the objectives of the Paris Agreement, upholding the right to food and fulfilling the global commitment to a truly sustainable development, leaving no farmer behind.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Sofia Luna Cuite on behalf of Indigenous peoples organizations. Madam, you have the floor.
Greetings. At this COP, Indigenous peoples of the 7 sociocultural regions have presented our proposals for the protection of our collective rights, knowledge systems, and rights to our territories. We are disappointed with the current state of negotiations. While this COP is being called the Indigenous Peoples COP, agenda items including the Global Stock Day, the Global Goal on Adaptation, the Global Multirao, and climate finance are proceeding with insufficient inclusion of our rights and priorities. In the Just Transition Work Program, some states have proposed to weaken references to Indigenous peoples' rights and erase much-needed protections for Indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation and initial contact. This is a red line for us. Today's transition pathways are expanding fossil fuel extraction, mining for so-called transitional or critical mineral, large-scale renewable energy projects, and agribusinesses without our free, prior, and informed consent, putting our lives, cultures, and territories at risk, and threatening the very survival of Indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation. The UN adoption on the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007 reaffirmed the collective rights of Indigenous peoples, and in 2025, the UN Human Rights Council explicitly recognized the rights of Indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation. It is therefore deeply concerning that some states are now attempting to weaken references to our rights when this language has been affirmed by the UN system. We are also concerned about protests that have been taking place outside the venue last week, and we stress that Indigenous peoples continue to be marginalized in spaces where decisions are made about us. The actions taken by our relatives from Brazil were powerful articulations of this long-standing frustration. We stand firmly with those who are affected by mining, mercury, contamination, oil development, deforestation, and the destruction of the Amazon, their home. We call on parties to ensure that COP30 decisions deliver concrete inclusion of our rights and priorities, not just symbolic mentions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Igor Normando on behalf of local government and municipal authorities. Sir, you have the floor.
Gostaria de cumprimentar inicialmente os distintos delegados, delegadas. Quero aqui falar principalmente sobre aquilo que nos é mais caro. Eu sou o prefeito Igor Normando, prefeito de Belém, cidade sede da COP30, e hoje, como prefeito da cidade, mas sobretudo como cidadão amazônida, sei da importância que este evento traz para a nossa cidade, porque é um grito de liberdade. A Amazônia, durante muitos séculos, foi apenas mais um capítulo dos livros de história, e agora nós estamos mostrando para o mundo os nossos desafios, mas as nossas soluções, e o quanto as soluções estão nas florestas, vinda do povo da floresta. Falo também em nome da Constituinte LGMA, que compreende que a colaboração multinível e urbana no âmbito da UNFCCC é fundamental para que a gente possa avançar na tão falada resiliência climática e preservação do meio ambiente. Não existe mudança sem ação, não existe nenhum tipo de implementação se todos nós não nos juntarmos em prol de um só objetivo, que é construir um planeta mais solidário e mais justo. Não existe, de forma alguma, justiça climática, se não houver também justiça social. É importante olhar os rios, olhar a floresta, mas se torna fundamental da mesma forma que possamos olhar aqueles que vivem nas florestas. Nós, amazônicos, sabemos os nossos desafios, mas, sobretudo, compreendemos também o nosso potencial. E hoje, o que trago aqui é uma mensagem das cidades, para que a gente possa avançar em colaboração e que o mundo passe a olhar a Amazônia com mais respeito. Muito obrigado e sejam bem-vindos a Belém, capital da Amazônia.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Emily Caroline Costa Silva on behalf of research and independent NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Agradeço à presidente a oportunidade de discursar nessa plenária em nome do Ringo. Ringo reconhece a dedicação das partes e dos observadores em promover o esforço climático global aqui em Belém e a liderança da presidência da COP em demonstrar que a colaboração global funciona. Elogiamos a energia positiva e o compromisso universal com o multilateralismo nessa conferência. As consultas multi-irão têm sido construtivas e direcionadas. Encorajamos a presidência e as partes a continuarem nesse espírito e aguardamos decisões robustas até o fim da semana. Ringo continua a enfatizar a importância de uma tomada de decisão e de políticas transparentes, inclusivas e cooperativas, baseada em ciência multidisciplinar, moderna e sólida, incluindo as ciências sociais e humanas. Igualmente essencial é o alinhamento com o conhecimento indígena, tradicional e das comunidades locais, que carrega gerações de experiência, gestão e compreensão contextual dos ecossistemas. As soluções devem basear-se em conhecimento científico credível e rigorosamente avaliado para orientar a tomada de decisões eficazes. Isso aplica-se a todas as questões aqui consideradas em Belém. Permitam-me destacar alguns exemplos. A ciência e a pesquisa são essenciais para as NDCs robustas e alinhadas com a meta 1.5, para o desenvolvimento de fontes inovadoras de financiamento climático, para a integridade do mercado de carbono no que diz respeito às perdas e danos, para os programas de trabalho de mitigação e adaptação, bem como para a geração de dados que permitem a elaboração de relatórios sobre o Acordo de Paris. Agradecemos o Dia da Informação sobre a Terra e atualizações abrangentes de uma ampla gama de organizações, mas compartilhamos da preocupação com o declínio relatado no apoio às observações da Terra. Incentivamos a CMA a concluir o trabalho de aprimoramento dos procedimentos para o balanço global, pois eles têm implicações significativas sobre como a comunidade de pesquisa pode melhorar e contribuir com o segundo GST. Nossa diversificada comunidade de pesquisa representa especialistas em agricultura, artigo 6, criosfera, finanças, perdas e danos, saúde, oceanos e tecnologia. Por fim, oferecemos o nosso apoio enquanto comunidade de conhecimento e ação para a concretização das metas climáticas. Obrigada.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Rebecca Okila on behalf of the trade union NGOs. Madam, you have the floor.
Distinguished delegates, I greet you all. It's an honor to be standing here before you. My name is Rebecca Okelo, a climate policy officer from the Central Organization of Trade Unions, Kenya. There is a growing feeling of disappointment with workers and their unions with the promises of the climate and clean energy transition. Workers in the fossil fuel intensive sectors do not see the support they need, both in terms of compensation packages and training opportunities to help them through the transition out of fossil fuels. The jobs created in renewable energy, in renewables are fewer than in the polluting industry, and too often, no decent and quality jobs with good pay. Governments are not providing answers to the climate emergency that we are facing. More and more of workers are facing with deeply heat waves and floods, while the protection are not being provided. Trade unions are proposing a just transition based on the protection and promotion of labor rights, and the answers to this loss of trust in climate and clean energy policy. We have many good national examples where we can build on. The German model of social dialogue and collective bargaining is an important and positive model. We also see good examples in the global south. In my country, we have trade unions in all sectors, some that are working on climate action. This important work should also receive a place in the UNFCCC. That is why we are asking Belém action mechanism of just transition to be decided at COP30. We don't want to create a new finance mechanism. We want all climate finance to respect just transition criteria. We also don't want to create a heavy new UN institution. We want cooperation between UN institutions such as the UNFCCC and the ILO. And above all, we want a mechanism that provides for the engagement with all the relevant stakeholders, especially with workers and the trade unions. The Belém Action Mechanism is a unique chance for COP30 to have a legacy that is relevant for workers and their families. We hope the government will be able to deliver this by the end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Esther Sena on behalf of the Women and Gender Constituency. Madam, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Mi nombre es Esther Sena, represento a GD10 Instituto da Mulher Negra y somos miembros del Grupo Constituinte de Mujeres y Género. Entramos en la segunda semana de la COP con una mayor atención a los textos de negociación. Este es un momento en que se puede consolidar los avances que tanto esperamos la población afuera de las salas. Pero lo que estamos viviendo es cómo se debilitan, se dejan de lado o se abandonan los derechos humanos. La inclusión de una perspectiva de género en las acciones climáticas no es un mero complemento ni una cuestión paralela. Es un elemento estructural de cualquier respuesta eficaz al marco de la Convención. Cuando se elimina o se diluye la lenguaje de género en los textos, ese impacto es real. Se reduce la ambición, se deliberan las decisiones y se pierden oportunidades para llevar a cabo acciones verdaderamente transformadoras. las mujeres y las personas no conformes con lo género, especialmente aquelas que se encontram en la primera línea en los territorios y comunidades más afectados, como las comunidades indígenas, afrodescendentes, incluídas las comunidades quilombolas, las comunidades de religiones tradicionales africanas y muchas otras. Ya están liderando soluciones de materia de mitigación, adaptación y justicia climática. La justicia de género sin justicia racial, sin justicia económica, no es más que retórica. Una retórica que sigue beneficiando a los mismos países e empresas que se lucran con la emergencia climática y el aumento de la desigualdad, a tiempo que ninguém el reconocimiento de las populaciones que sacan sus tierras, sus cuerpos y sus derechos colectivos. Pedimos coherencia, que esta realidad se refleja adequadamente en la lenguaje de los textos y los resultados de esta COP. La COP30 será seguida acerca por el mundo, y la historia que se contará en Belém dependerá de las decisiones que se tomen ahora. Esperamos que se recuerde como la COP que consolidó los compromisos para avanzar hacia de una fase de implementación, y no como la que permitió retrocesos, y quedó como otra ronda de negociaciones climáticas vacías. Les pedimos que no transicionen nuestra debilitada confianza en procesos multilaterales y el compromiso de las partes, que garantizar para que el reconocimiento de la igualdad de género y racial se mantenga en un elemento transversal e inegociable. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Yazid Salahuddin on behalf of the Children and Youth NGOs. Sir, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, distinguished co-chairs, delegates, fellow observers, my name is Yazid Salahuddin Mikhail. I speak on behalf of Children and Youth Constituency, Yungo. I voluntarily disclose that I have no direct ties to fossil fuel industry and no conflict of interest. Children and young people are expecting this COP to deliver real tangible progress across all negotiation tracks, not promises, not placeholders. On finance, we call for a stand-alone agenda item on Article 9.1 with clear milestone to scale up adequate grant-based finance and at least tripling adaptation finance grounded in equity, justice, and ensuring predictable direct access for those on the front line. We demand an adaptation package with an agreed list of child and youth-sensitive DGA indicators and a new adaptation finance goal that responds to the developing countries' need. We must undertake concrete technical follow-up work on indicators. On just transition, we call for the establishment of a Belem action mechanism firmly guided by established just transition principles, including respect for labor rights, intergenerational equity, care economy, and free, prior, and informed consent. On loss and damage, we welcome the FILD's launch, but funding remains far below the 450 billion needed yearly, risking a liquidity crisis by 2027. The WMI review must link finance to human rights, require aid and gender disaggregated data, and recognize non-economic losses affecting children and youth. On mitigation, we call for a commitment toward a just transition away from all fossil fuel with major emitters using the MWP outcome to immediately submit enhanced NDC with Align 1.5 GST2 must be fully inclusive, grounded in IPCC science, finalized with strong modalities in Belém. On nature, we urge a deforestation roadmap in cover decision to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. We affirm the need to have a draft text or Rio Convention synergies, including strengthening the mandate of the Joint Liaison Group and the establishment of an ad hoc technical expert group and a joint work program. On children's rights, we urge parties to include the primary consideration of children across work programs and decisions, such as the mutual decision, and to guarantee the continuity of the expert dialogue on children and climate change held at SB60. We also call on parties to formally recognize the 2025 Global Youth Statement, the largest declaration of youth around the world on climate change, at the mutual decision outcome. If COP30 is to be the COP of truths, it needs to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality of the discrepancy between what the citizens back home need and what negotiations are set to deliver. It is time for your action to save our planet, our future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Tonia Torelli Hendricks on behalf of the faith-based organizations. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, distinguished participants, dear brothers and sisters, as the planet confronts an existential emergency, faith communities are alarmed by the international community's inaction. Our traditions hold no self-interest in global climate negotiations. We advocate for all life on Earth. A decade after the Paris Agreement, we stand firmly for our planet, for the most vulnerable, and for future generations of every species. Our communities are united by moral teachings calling us to work for climate justice and to uphold a human rights approach that prioritizes the voice of the most impacted. Only 10% of the world's population has been responsible for 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions since 1990. Those most responsible must take the lead in reducing emissions and providing the financial resources for a just transition. Today, 3.4 billion people live in countries that spend more on servicing debt than on responding to the climate emergency and on essential services. The debt crisis intensifies the climate crisis, and the climate crisis worsens the debt crisis. This must stop. We welcome the Brazilian presidency's global ethical solutions and stocktake, but ethics must be more than symbolic. They must shape decisions and outcomes. In the spirit of Mitiro, walking together, supporting one another, and leaving no one behind, we call upon COP30 to secure that all climate actions are founded on equity and human rights, including gender equity and the protection of indigenous people, submit ambitious NDCs in line with climate science, deliver on climate finance to the levels of $1.3 trillion yearly without generating new debt, advance levels as a cornerstone of climate finance and include debt cancellation in climate finance negotiations, adopt a just transition work program that accelerates the transition to renewables while tackling inequalities, and finally, phase out fossil fuels by adopting the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Rosa Maria Juarez Cobeñas on behalf of the Disability Caucus. Madam, you have the floor.
Excelencias, estados, observadores, colegas. Mi nombre es Rosa María Juárez Cobeñas y hablo en nombre del Grupo de Discapacidad. Nos encontramos en un momento decisivo para la respuesta mundial frente a la crisis climática. Para que esta respuesta sea efectiva, todas las personas deben poder participar de manera plena y significativa. Sin embargo, las personas con discapacidad, especialmente quienes también enfrentan discriminación por género, identidad LGBTQ+, identidad indígena, edad, ubicación o situación socioeconómica, enfrentan riesgos desproporcionados y siguen infrarrepresentadas en las políticas climáticas. Datos recientes muestran que el 72% de las NDCA aún no mencionan la discapacidad. Solo el 14% incluyen medidas concretas. Somos el 16% de la población mundial. Esta exclusión es inaceptable. Nuestro liderazgo, conocimiento y experiencia son claves para construir soluciones climáticas justas y eficaces. Para garantizar una participación equitativa, es imprescindible contar con un grupo de discapacidad formalmente establecido dentro de la CMNCU como órgano constituyente para avanzar hacia una acción climática sostenible, inclusiva y basada en los derechos humanos. Solicitamos también 3 compromisos: crear un grupo de trabajo específico dentro de la CCMNS para las personas con discapacidad, exigir a las partes que incorporen informes detallados sobre inclusión de la discapacidad en sus CNDC y estrategias de adaptación en el próximo balance global, promover la equidad interseccional mediante la información sistemática de la discapacidad junto con género y edad y todas las políticas. Para garantizar estos compromisos, la accesibilidad debe considerarse un pilar fundamental. El tiempo es corto. La COP30 debe generar compromisos audaces y sistémicos que garanticen que las personas con discapacidad nunca se queden atrás. Las soluciones que funcionan para nosotros funcionarán para todas las personas y son esenciales para un futuro verdaderamente inclusivo, resiliente y justo. Gracias.
Thank you, madam. Dear colleagues, I thank all intergovernmental organizations and non-governmental organizations for your statements. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of the statement by IGOs and NGOs and the end of the high-level segment. With this, I declare this joint meeting of COP, CMP, and CMA closed.